Hello and welcome to the live stream as I get myself set up here, and apologies for the microphone disturbances there. So this one will be a hard out today, as they say. I have a dinner engagement in a little over an hour with some old friends, a large group of us actually. So I really have to finish this at about 5:30 my time. So we've got 40 minutes to get through a lot of questions received on Twitter, which are really interesting ones. Some are going to be a little bit tricky to try and get done in the time I've allotted myself here today. Been a lot of activity when it comes to Topcast recently. I encourage anyone watching this to view my Origins video. That one took a long time to produce, putting together all the images from the James Webb Space Telescope, researching that, explaining what it's all about, and then setting a musical score to it. I didn't write the music, of course, but trying to get the music to work with the words and all that kind of thing is a bit difficult. As I just said in my Substack newsletter, some people don't appreciate the music stuff. I love those sort of videos, not necessarily mine in particular, but these sort of inspiring kind of videos filled with images and explanations with a soundtrack. But my video, whatever the case, can be found on my website without the music as well. So that's available, and it's available on all podcast feeds too. Let me get straight into the questions because I'm cognizant of the time I have left to myself. Logan Chipkin has asked. Logan is a great friend of the channel of Topcast. Logan is an expert in constructive theory. So anyone who's interested in learning more about constructive theory should get in contact with Chipkin Logan. And so if you go to the tweet that I recently put out asking about questions for this AMA, the very first question is being asked by Logan. So I've just got to remember what his, I'm just looking at my mobile phone, how to get in contact with him, because he did tell me, and now I have neglected to remember precisely what the message was. So the best way is via Twitter, just via Twitter. If you've got questions about constructive theory, he's the man to go to. He's the man to go to in the first instance. He's very much working on that. So at Chipkin, ChipkinLogan. Contact him and he'll Zoom call with you. He'll answer your questions via Twitter DM. DMs are open, all that sort of stuff. And, because, the researchers like Kiara and David are obviously engaged in the research. And Logan is engaged in outreach. And so he's really keen on talking to people about the significance of constructive theory. So contact him, learning about constructive theory. He knows he's conducted interviews himself with Chiara Marletto about it. Anyway, so expert on constructive theory is Logan. Let's have a look at what his question is, and I'm sure it's going to be a curly one, knowing Logan. Our ability to employ money and energy is currently hampered by cocktails of bad ideas. Given current cultural forces, technologies, and our best explanations in the relevant domains, which, if any of these nasty cocktails, is more easily defeatable? Yes, prophecy is impossible. So he's saying prophecy is impossible there because he knows that I know that I can't possibly foresee what is the most easily defeatable. There's probably a hierarchy of importance in these things. So do you put your energies into the most important things, which may be the hardest to defeat, or the lower hanging fruit, insofar as there is lower hanging fruit? What I've been animated by recently is, of course, this pervasive pessimism. And I had to begin laughing at it. And, my most recent podcast that's out there is all about Sam Harris's most recent podcast, number 288 of the Making Sense podcast, specifically about the end of the world. He makes no bones about it. He's talking about the end of the world. He's talking about the end of the world order. He thinks America's in decline. Well, he and his interlocutor, who is an author of a book all about this stuff, were just in furious agreement, more or less. And they had a third guest who also, kind of thought America's in decline and the world is going to hell in a handbasket very quickly. This is the prevailing intellectual view. So one reason I listen to Sam is he has excellent guests, but also he's a barometer. He's a barometer for the common intellectual zeitgeist. You know, you go to Sam's podcast and you learn what the smart people are thinking. The people with the credentials, the people from universities, the people with lots of books to their name, lots of letters after their name, lots of experience working in public policy, government, science, and all that sort of stuff. So it's good to hear what they say. And so I think, in answer to Logan's question, the cocktail of bad ideas fundamentally reduced to an anti-humanism, that Logan would agree with this. Which of these cocktails are more easily defeated? I don't know if any of them are easily defeatable. I think if we can defeat one, we end up defeating them all. It's almost like the AGI problem, you know. You figure out how creativity works, and maybe you figure out what consciousness is as well on top of that. Well, some of us think that. And mysteries associated with the human mind might all be solved if you solve any one of them. In the same way, this pervasive pessimism that exists now has to be countered from many different directions. The schooling is a bad one, obviously. Professors are indoctrinating each other with pessimistic ideas. In particular, they are indoctrinating teaching students who go along to the university to learn to be teachers, who then go on to indoctrinate school children, who then grow up to indoctrinate their own children and go on to become teachers. And so the cycle continues. This priesthood, as Naval Ravikant calls it, you know, the only people allowed into these institutions and to make it through these institutions have to be ordained into the pessimistic worldview. We need an alternative to that, and I've been talking about this recently. I think the universities still do good work and they have an important function to serve, but there needs to be a free market approach to this thing, and we need a way to have an alternative. I've talked about this before. So I don't have an answer to Logan, any better than Logan himself would have, as to which is most easily defeatable. It seems to me like socialism is here to stay for a while. Unfortunately, we're both on the same page there. The people like governments. They want government to be the solution rather than seeing government as the problem. They don't like paying taxes themselves, but they think there's a moral virtue to paying tax because it helps everyone. There's all of this sort of stuff. You know, if we can undo these bad ideas, it's all about the ideas. Somehow we have to undo these ideas. So easily defeatable. Perhaps the incremental gradual undoing of coercive compulsory schooling would be one of the more easily defeatable things. I don't think we'll eliminate schooling entirely, but at least we can reduce the coercive elements of schooling, more of the coercive elements of schooling. You know, asymptotically approach the time when no one's going to school, but it's not going to happen overnight. So if we can fix the curricula, if people who are not super woke, lefty, verging on the side of communists, if they weren't always given a free ride through the institutions, then maybe that's one of the more easily defeatable things we can do. That the people on our side, when they actually occupy positions of power, actually use it to change people's minds and do something that actually use their power to remove people who occupy positions of power in these institutions, if you know what I mean. If politicians who get into power can remove some of the bureaucrats, that would be good. It's been happening recently, right? You get these so-called conservative governments in places like Britain. I don't like to talk about politics too much, but places like Britain, places like United States, places like Australia, they can't do much because the bureaucracy is still against them. And so, well, so that was a non-answer to Logan's question. Let's go on to Arjun, another great friend of the channel. How far can the Darwinian natural selection analogy extend to criticism of ideas and theories, i.e. survival of the fittest theories? When, if it does, start to mislead the explanation of either one or both, the nature of evolution of species and the selection of ideas? So what I would say there is that, yeah, it's kind of an analogy and kind of not an analogy, this idea, because Popper subtitled his book, Objective Knowledge, an evolutionary approach. So it's absolutely evolution of a kind. What we're doing is replacing theories with better theories. They're being tested against reality, and we're error correcting, which is precisely what biological organisms do as well. And so, yes, it's an analogy, but slightly stronger than an analogy, but also don't take it too far, in the sense that biological evolution is, of course, a blind process. There's no intelligence there directing it. And human beings are intelligent and are directing the creative deployment and generation of explanatory knowledge. So that's a thing. The difference between, blind, searching for solutions, and intelligently searching for solutions, creatively searching for solutions. So that's the parallels between them. There is an analogy. They're both about creating knowledge. One's explanatory knowledge, one's genetic knowledge. When, if it does, start to mislead, it starts to mislead when people think that it's a kind of random process of a kind in the case of explanatory knowledge. So it's not random. It's intelligence that's has a goal in mind. There's no goal when it comes to survival of the fittest. Okay, you can call it a goal. The genes are trying to survive, but they're not really trying. We are trying. We have a goal. We want to survive. We want to solve that particular problem. We have wants. So that's a subtle, well, not a subtle, it's a stark difference. Ashik asks, since physical world has laws of physics governing it, what do you think about world of minds, world 2? Could it also have laws governing it? If yes, how could we discover them? Absolutely. Yeah, we live in a reality, broadly speaking. Now, Popper partitions this up into worlds 1, 2, and 3. How useful that is, I don't know. Certainly there's a difference between the purely physical world made of particles and then the abstract world, which consists of ideas and theories and so on. And also the abstractions themselves. So numbers are not numerals, but numbers exist. The prime numbers exist. There are prime numbers that exist that we have not discovered yet. They're out there. They're not made of matter. So these worlds exist and they're governed by laws. So in the same way that we have laws of physics governing the behavior of matter, yes, we have laws of mathematics, for example, governing the behavior of abstract sets of numbers and patterns. Music is not made of matter, although it's vibrations within the matter. The harmonies and so on are governed by laws that aren't reducible to, laws of physics. And the world of the mind has to be governed by things. The way in which the generation of ideas occurs is governed by things which we only understand poorly. What do you think about, well, can it have laws? So the answer, I'm doing short answers today. I apologize to everyone. Got to get through these. Could it also have laws governing it? The answer is yes. If yes, how could we discover them? By the same mechanism that we use elsewhere, except maybe we can't use experimentation. But we have to conjecture, and then we have to criticize our conjectures, testing them against reality. Mathematicians don't do experiments as such. They're not going into a laboratory, but they're absolutely testing against certain criteria. They're seeing whether or not a theorem follows from given axioms. They're criticizing their hypotheses, so to speak. Well, they're theorems, they're conjectures, literally called conjectures. So that's one thing. A musician is testing ideas. An artist is testing ideas against internal criteria they have, which can still represent objective standards of reality, objective standards of beauty, and so on and so forth. So that's the answer to that. Mart Van Meegen asks, what is the CR view of first principle reasoning? I don't know what the CR view version is. What I would say is that first principle reasoning doesn't require us to begin at a particular place. All it says is, can we have a coherent picture of reality? So going back to first principles means beginning with our fundamental ideas, what then follows. If you're trying to do engineering on a particular physical structure and you're not sure about whether it works, well, let's begin with the literal fundamentals of, let's say, Newtonian mechanics. Is the thing going to stand up? If you're an architect, it might be a good way to go. Rather than just inventing a new, pretty artistic looking structure, you don't want it to get to the engineering stage and the civil engineers to turn around and go, well, that's ridiculous. There's no way this thing is going to stand up. You can be the greatest architect in the world and have an artistic vision, but if you don't realize that the laws of physics are going to cause this thing to topple over, there's no point even beginning the project unless you're inventing structures for a fictional world. So first principle reasoning means going back to the laws that govern the emergent thing that you're interested in trying to solve the problem of. You've got a problem, and that problem is going to be solved either by the creative generation of a new piece of emergent knowledge, and insofar as you can't do that, then go deeper. Think about what the principles already known, the background knowledge already known by yourself and civilization are, so that you can make progress forward. Background knowledge is a thing. Background knowledge means, what do you already know? What do you already know? So that's what I would say first principles reasoning happens to be, beginning with what you know, and solving problems via that mechanism of the deepest explanations that we have. Randell, Brett, what is the quickest way to take in beyond infinity? I guess it means the beginning of infinity. The quickest way. I don't know. Maybe start with the podcast I did with Naval on Naval's podcast. It's a 2-part podcast that each one runs for about an hour. It's made up of lots of little points. We try to traverse much of the worldview of David Deutsch. So that could be a way to take in the basic ideas. For some people, for whatever reason, they begin the book and then put the book down and never pick it up again. But so maybe for such people, but they think there's importance to it because everyone else is talking about it. Maybe then, going via the podcast route, as I say, going via Naval's podcast would be of great benefit. That's an introduction. That's an in. David Deutsch has done lots of interviews. He's done TED Talks. TED Talks are a great way in to the beginning of infinity, way of thinking about the world, and then go back to the book. I don't think there's any substitute for the book as such. The quickest way to take it in, however, people talk down, I don't know why, people talk down audiobooks. And yet I love audiobooks. I tend to remember audiobooks better sometimes than I do text. Some human beings might be like this, but I know that if I'm listening to an audiobook or a podcast and I walk around my local neighborhood, I know the local neighborhood pretty well, as people do, then I can remember precisely what I was listening to down to the sentence and word and phrase if I just picture where I was at the time during the walk, and vice versa. If I re-listen back to it, I go, oh, I can remember I was outside of that shop at the time. And so this is why I think audiobooks are good, because it's got a natural mnemonic to it. I use both the audiobook and the text, and I go backwards and forwards between them. But for me personally, if I want to consume a book quickly, I do the audiobook. I do the audiobook. I just go on a big long walk if it's a new book. And often that's when I decide, listening to the audiobook, I'm not going to do a podcast about that book, but I will do a podcast about this book. Pinker was one like that. I listened through and I thought, I've got to do a podcast about this because there's some good stuff, but there's so many misconceptions as well. Okay. Dr. Satish Ganorka has asked, Karl Popper writing is vast. Any book that will explain it in a concise way. And a person called Satpreet has answered Karl Popper by Brian McGee, which is the answer. The answer. It's one answer. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great answer. Brian McGee was a British politician. He also has a series of interviews online with famous philosophers. He wrote a book called Popper. It's a very thin volume, but it's great. It covers the basic ideas. So in, well under 100 pages, you get dense material of good stuff. So I think that's a way that will explain it in a concise way. And if you're new to it, as many people have advised before, you're interested in Karl Popper, you're interested in critical rationalism, then don't go to Karl Popper. Go to David Deutsch. Go to The Fabric of Reality, go to The Beginning of Infinity. And then if you're still wanting more, then you go to Karl Popper or read around him. David Miller was a collaborator with Karl Popper and has written books about critical rationalism as well. So there are various ways. I wouldn't go to universities. All they are is going to present Popper in an incorrect light. That's one thing. I hate to say it. I'm going to have to say it. the typical university academic who claims expertise in Popper is going to get it wrong. University academics need to publish or perish, so they're going to be writing papers. So they'll be perhaps misinterpreting Popper and then publishing papers based upon a bad reading of Popper. So go to David Deutsch in the first instance, go to Brian McGee. Read Karl Popper's his autobiography, his intellectual autobiography, Unended Quest, I think it's called. Something like that. Yeah, so that's a really great way in as well. It's a fun read because it's about his life, but also it's entirely about his philosophy and how he came to the problems that he was interested in and how he came up with the solutions. Okay, so that's that. Hervey, sorry if I'm getting names wrong here. Suppose we have a theory of creativity and are able to create universal explainers. From an ethical perspective, do you think that they would decide for or against instantiating copies of themselves and for or against instantiating universal explainers in simulations? I'm going to use Logan's little quip earlier. A prophecy is not a thing. Right? I don't know. A universal explainer is a person, so how can I possibly guess the mind of these people and what they'll want to do? Morally, what do I think of making copies of yourself? I don't know. I haven't thought enough about it. I don't. Making a copy of yourself isn't making yourself. So if you were able to take a copy of your mind somehow or other, instantiate it in silicon, reproduce yourself in a robot, then what you've got over there is a copy of yourself that is not you. It's a copy of you. And from that moment onward, because it's in a different place, having different experiences, it's going to be thinking different things. Sure, it's going to think very similar things for a while, but you're, from that moment onwards, diverging into completely different people. You are completely different people, and you become more and more different over time in the same way that fungible instances of yourself across the multiverse also become different over time as time goes on. Morally, what I think about these things, these are those kind. It's trolley problems. You know, these things don't happen in real life. Insofar as they do, let's deal with it when it comes. Let's talk about the problems now. What problems exist now? I can think of what this is why doomsday scenarios and the work of people like Nick Bostrom, it just seemed to me like such a waste of time, such a waste of intellectual talent and mental capacity, because far better to deal with the problems now and to focus philosophical and scientific effort on the real problems we have right now. Hey, inflation is a thing. What can we do? Why isn't everyone talking about that? Ukraine is a thing. Let's talk about that. Philosophy can help with these things as well as science and politics and all of that stuff. Talking about the doomsday scenarios of the next millennium or the next century, let's deal with it then. We have what Popper refers to as problem situations. So what might the AGI of the year 2100 do when it comes to making copies themselves? I don't know, but I'll give you an answer then. Okay, when it's actually an issue, we'll talk about it then. I don't want to be dismissive. Jesse, another great friend of Talkcast. Institutional knowledge is largely inexplicit. In politics or science, what should be made more explicit? And is it always better to have explicit knowledge, or do we want more background inexplicit knowledge to decrease the cognitive load? Interesting. So cognitive load isn't a thing, I don't think. I think that people can get confused and bored, maybe tired. You hear these things that, in fact, there's no such thing as the brain being tired or the mind being tired. What happens is you get bored. Of course, you can get physically tired, but you get bored. So I don't know about cognitive load being a thing. You know, you just get loaded up with so much information that you can't handle it anymore. I think that's just itself a kind of knowledge as to whether or not you can deal with streams of information and deal with new ideas. And some people just get sort of hyper and they call that being overwhelmed, but that's a whole other question. When it comes to institutional knowledge being largely inexplicit, that's correct. So if we can just talk about normal political institutions, the way in which parliaments work and why, my hobby horse, why dynamic societies that are advanced, how they're able to remain stable over long periods of time, we don't know all the reasons why. We can talk about democracy, freedom, liberty, capitalism. We can talk about the rule of law. We can talk about these things that have inexplicit knowledge instantiated in them, and we can make explicit some things. We can say, well, you need to have elections regularly. You need to have courts to decide when different arms of the government are disagreeing with each other as to who is correct. You need a criminal system, a police. These have institutions. Why do you need all these things? Precisely why. We can list some reasons, but you won't have an exhaustive reason, and you won't convince people who are, for example, anarcho-capitalists or pure communists why we shouldn't have a revolution or move towards a system without institutions, or a system with an institution that is completely different to what we have now. You can't explain it to them entirely because it's not explicit. But here's the thing. The British tradition and the American tradition and places like Australia are relatively stable compared to anywhere else in the world. There have been revolutions in Britain, but of all the places on planet Earth, it has the fewest revolutions and the least amount of violence and all of that sort of stuff by comparison. Over a long period of time, able to make progress, creating wealth. And as people like Douglas Murray say, people are fighting to get into these countries. The places where people are fighting to get into, the United States, chief among them, Britain, areas of Europe, Australia, there's something that people know that are trained to get in there. Namely, it's better than the places they're fleeing from, which are the vast majority of countries around the world. Okay? People are trying to get out of certain countries and into other countries. The countries they're trying to get into have something going for them. And we can't outline exactly everything that's going for them, why they're filled with peace and prosperity and the capacity for opportunity and wealth. But there are reasons. What should we try and make explicit as much as we possibly can? But that's work for other people. I leave that to the political scientists insofar as they can do a good job of that. But we've made some things explicit. You know, Popper made explicit the idea of what democracy's for, making explicit that democracy is not about installing the best leader. It's about having a system that enables you to remove bad leaders without violence rather efficiently, as just happened or is in the process of happening in Britain, again, for the umpteenth time in their history, removing a leader they didn't want and no violence. Unlike in Sri Lanka, where you have to call that violence, right? the people there are occupying the presidential palace, the prime minister's residence, the institution. So they got rid of him, probably rightly so, because of the level of inflation and everything that went wrong. Another story. Okay, so anyway, there is this institutional knowledge largely inexplicit. Totally agree. We can't make it all explicit. I don't really entirely know how. $$ has asked, what does it exactly mean for a guest to survive criticism, error correction, and thus qualify as knowledge? This question was asked last time. I answered it last time. So I won't repeat myself. It's in the other live stream. I'm not sure why $'s asking it again. But what it means is that it's the guest that has been tested against reality, and it's the only surviving one. So general relativity is a theory that survived criticism. And so what does it mean for it to survive criticism? It's solving all the problems that the other theories can't. That's the answer. Okay. We'll skip to Tadas. What role do you think dreams will play in our ability to create knowledge and make progress? I find their potential to be enormous for generating new ideas, but most tend to overlook them. I think because many people forget their dreams. I know that people dream every night, but many people forget their dreams and say they don't have them. Certainly there have been cases of scientists and intellectuals throughout history. Feynman was one among others. Was it Watson or Crick who said that he saw the structure of DNA in a dream? Dreams are just sources of guesses, absolutely. Our subconscious is a thing. Our unconscious is a thing. We can get information from these places. And so, yeah, absolutely, dreams can be a source of knowledge. It's just that it's hard to criticize them. What do I think about our ability to make progress? Yeah, it's good. It's just not reliable. Their potential to be enormous. Perhaps it is. Perhaps we can tap it in some way. Perhaps we're just skimming the surface when it comes to our capacity to harness what our mind is capable of doing. And other people talk about that a lot. But for now, I'm personally interested in what we already know. What we already know is our conscious mind can solve problems. Our unconscious mind can do stuff. People are investigating that. It's not a reliable way in which to solve your problems. So if you've got a real problem, maybe going off to sleep once or twice is better, and then you'll have a better idea in the morning or during a dream. But really, if you've got a problem, you better think about it, okay? Sleeping, thinking that it's going to come up during a dream, possibly not the best way to go. Okay, let's go to the next one. Jedi Phone. What could move humans from a competition mindset for land, food, gold, data, etc., to a cooperation mindset. If humans are going to handle the climate change and colonize the universe, it seems like we should be pulling the oars in the same direction. Thanks for your ideas. No, I don't agree. I don't think we need to be pulling the oars in the same direction at all. I think cooperation and competition are not necessarily antagonistic. They're not necessarily at odds with one another. After all, huge groups of people can cooperate together on the scale of dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions. There's a sense in which whole nations are cooperating, and at least whole sides of politics, hundreds of millions of people cooperating in order to do the same thing. We don't need the entire globe to cooperate and do the same thing, because then my idea is that you're putting all your eggs into one basket, into one particular solution, the solution that you've all decided you're going to cooperate on, and meanwhile you're not looking out for the asteroid that's coming behind you because you're looking at the asteroid coming in front of you, metaphorically speaking. So when it comes to climate change, we don't all have to join together and to pull in the same direction. No, we need everyone to be doing their own thing. And insofar as we've got hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people really interested in solving the problem of climate change, that's enough. I mean, heck, has there ever been a problem with more human intellectual power geared towards the solving of it? I don't think so. People around the world, whole portions of nations are fixated upon trying to solve climate change. So insofar as there are certain people who aren't fixated on that or even arguing against it, I wouldn't be worried if you're a climate change advocate. I really wouldn't worry, because you've got enough people on your side. You don't need everyone. I don't need everyone to be a critical rationalist. I don't need everyone to be an optimist. I don't need everyone to be on board with spreading the ideas at the beginning of infinity. I'd like it if they were. I don't need everyone to be a capitalist. The diversity of ideas is always going to be better, because I could be wrong, and I want to know quickly if I am wrong. So should the climate change activists, by the way. They need people to be criticizing them. For any given problem, no matter how big, it could be the case that you might be misconceived. It could be the case. So we need competition and we need cooperation. They shouldn't be seen as at odds with one another. I am going to struggle to get through these questions in the next few minutes, as I say. Dinner date calls. The Sarcastigator. Could human consciousness be nothing more than the act of creating explanations? Yes, it could be anything at this point, as long as it doesn't violate the laws of physics. I've written a blog post about this: creativity, consciousness, free will, and explanations, knowledge creation, something or other. I don't know. And I make that point. I get it from David Deutsch. Credit to him. In the beginning of Infinity, he kind of hints at, he doesn't lay out a theory. He's not saying this is what he really thinks. He's just saying it's possible that things like explanation generation and consciousness come along together for the ride. And I say, well, yeah, whatever free will is, whatever our capacity to create explanations is, whatever consciousness is, all of these things together could just be facets of the one whole thing. And that one whole thing, we don't know what it is, but once we have it, that will be the explanation. That will solve all the other things. And the other things will just go, oh, that's why consciousness is what it is. That's why being able to generate explanations is what it is. Oh, that's why free will is a thing, and so on and so forth. We haven't got that yet. We've just got these labels for mysteries. And so, yes, I agree with you. Could it be? Yes, it could be. Could it perhaps be something completely different to what I just said? Yes. No one knows what consciousness is. We're barely able to coherently put the question. Any well-known examples of a scientist renouncing his own theory after working on it for many years, if not decades? Renouncing his own theory? Perhaps someone in the comments could tell me that. I can't think of anyone in particular. I guess you think of someone like Michelson, Arthur Michelson, Michael Michelson. I can't remember. Physicist anyway, who participated in the Michelson-Morley experiment, famous for saying that physics was coming to an end in the early 1900s, then went on to perform the experiment. That helped to demonstrate that Newtonian physics could not be correct. And he went on, therefore, to contribute to, certainly relativity, quantum theory. So he must have, I can't give you a quote, but he must have thought, well, everything I said up until that point about how physics was just about finished and Newton had discovered all of the laws of physics was completely wrong. So he gave up that idea. Now, that's not specifically renouncing his own theory. It's a theory about theories. But Any well-known examples of a scientist renouncing his... Has anyone given me an answer? No. Someone has asked, I've just looked over, are you familiar with Peter Zihan Ideas? That's from Bahan. My most recent podcast is precisely about Peter Zihan. Look that up. Okay, so that's on YouTube. It's a response video to Sam Harris, but it's basically about the ideas of Peter Zihan. Okay, so if anyone watching is interested, just, look up my last podcast about that. Okay, these are going to be rapid fire over the next few. I apologize to people. I'll do another live stream in the end of next week or the week after, something like that. This is from Daniel. Entrepreneurs who decide today to set up a new business have to try and predict what some number of consumer preferences are going to be in the future. If their prediction is successful, the business will thrive. Is trying to predict what people will want in the future prophecy. They're not trying so much to predict what people will want in the future as trying to solve a problem now. People have a problem now. Ideally, what a business is doing, what a person who is producing a product is doing, is solving a problem, solving a particular problem. And if they're solving a problem, then their product will be a solution to that, which is not so much trying to figure out what consumer preferences will be as, here's the problem, let's solve it now. Sometimes you get geniuses, the Steve Jobs of the world, who go, well, people don't even know they've got this problem. The old smartphone idea. You don't even know you've got the problem of wanting to have all your music in a phone, wanting to have access to the internet from your phone, wanting to make phone calls, emails. You want to have your entire life in a phone. You don't even know you've got that problem. But I'm going to give you the solution. And then you'll realize, aha, I'm solving all of these problems all in one way. But you have to identify the problem. It's not so much predicting preferences as identifying problems people have now and then solving them. Rather than thinking of it in terms of prediction prophecy. Vincent, beyond the jaw-dropping pictures, what is the positive impact James Webb will likely produce that nobody is talking about? I don't know what nobody is talking about. We can't predict exactly what James Webb will lead to, but it's certainly inspiring people. I think one of the great things, despite the scientism that has been increasing over the last few years, at least there is a resurgence now in interest in science, ostensibly people talking about in positive ways science and astronomy. And of course, I like people to be interested in astronomy and astrophysics and cosmology and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's one great thing that the James Webb will do. It will get people interested in physical sciences again, kids interested in perhaps being inspired by the physical sciences again. Hubble was already doing that. This is just going to level it up even more. People are going to move into fundamental science. They're going to, okay, here's one thing that people aren't talking about. If I'm right, that people are going to be inspired to get into physics, astronomy, because of James Webb, because of the pretty pictures, they'll want to be able to find a way to contribute to fundamental science. But because of the poverty of education that exists now in existing institutions to a large extent, maybe, going back to what I said earlier, people will demand a different way of doing science and learning science, and we'll finally have something rise up in the place of the universities. That's what I really hope for. And so perhaps that is a thing people aren't talking about, and that can be in part caused by something as simple as pretty pictures from the James Webb Space Telescope. People wanting to come into science, but not wanting to have to go through the university system. So some people are working on that now. Okay, so now I'm going to go through and again, very quickly, people who have asked questions now just on YouTube. Virgil has asked, what is the best career choice to advance David's ideas and worldview, quantum computing? I don't know. Quantum computing is certainly worth going into. I can't give people particular career advice. It depends on what your interests are. If you want to advance David's idea, get out there, tweet, blog, make YouTubes, podcasts, talk to people, be an optimist and object when people are saying the world is going to rack and ruin and that you need to pay higher taxes because only the government can save you. So what is the best career choice? It's like literally anything. You can, whatever career you're in at the moment, you can promote the worldview that is optimistic and counter to the prevailing intellectual zeitgeist. Adil asks, hi Brett, can you please explain what it means for a theory to be falsifiable or not? For example, is the theory of evolution by natural selection falsifiable? Well, you've picked one there. Is the theory of evolution by natural selection falsifiable? Some people say that the theory of evolution by natural selection is a so-called research program, which is a broader category than theory. It's an explanation, but within that research program, you do experiments, none of which can possibly falsify the theory of evolution, which does not make it sort of unscientific. It could make it non-science. Why do we say this? Well, Haldane said, when asked what would falsify evolution by natural selection, he said rabbits in the Precambrian, by which he meant the existence of rabbits in a strata of rock, before the dinosaurs existed, would be inexplicable. But it wouldn't be inexplicable. It would just mean that it would be a problem for evolution. It's like evolution could explain that. It could say that evolution happened faster in that particular place than anywhere else, and then those rabbits went extinct. So it wouldn't technically falsify evolution by natural selection. So evolution by natural selection can be just in the same way that you could ask the question, what could possibly falsify Popper's theory of falsification? Well, that's the wrong question to ask. Okay, so what it means for a theory to be falsifiable is there an experiment such that when you have two competing good explanations, one or all the others can be ruled out, leaving only one in its place? That's what falsifiable means. Can be physically testable in principle. In principle. It doesn't mean in practice. In practice, you might not be able to build the apparatus and so on and so forth. Okay, I sort of have to go, unfortunately. Just finished the episode about Sam Harris. Great view. Thank you. Maxine, have you heard about Carl Friston's free energy principle? It seems to resonate with Caramel letters. Yeah, these free energy ideas. Well, there's lots of energy in the vacuum of space. And so, yeah, perhaps they could be harnessed in some way. We don't know. Any thoughts on Scott Arison joining OpenAI? Are we going to see quantum machine learning soon? I don't know. Yeah, it's pretty cool, but I don't know enough about quantum machine learning and what the possibilities are there. Adil, what kind of mathematics is best to learn if I want to learn quantum mechanics? Well, it can be done with a minimum amount these days. People simply learn about matrices, and they can learn a lot of quantum theory. But look up the University of New South Wales. They have a research that's in Australia. They have a research centre in Sydney, and they teach people quantum computation. So that's worth thinking about. Oh, quantum mechanics, you asked, not quantum computation. Quantum mechanics is all areas. Someone's answered. Quantum mechanics learn linear algebra, complex numbers, calculus. Yeah, all that stuff. And as I say, the mathematics of matrices, matrix mathematics, is also another way. There's the Heisenberg view of doing things, but you need differential equations in the traditional way to learn normal mathematics. So it's lots and lots of calculus. The traditional route to learning quantum theory is differential equations. Evan O'Leary, the media might cover up the numbers about how many people are leaving and joining each country. Okay. Answered that. Aniket, why is it not possible for quantum computing to be simulated on a classical computer? Well, it can be, absolutely. It just will be too slow. The whole point of quantum computation is that you have this massive speed up for a certain class of computations because of the massive parallelism that's going on. You can simulate that with a classical computer, but just at a much, much slower rate. So that defeats the whole purpose. Yeah. Dammy, do you think examination tests help us in creating new ideas? No, unless you're writing the questions yourself. Greetings from the Philippines. What is the best way to learn? Thank you. What is the best way to learn game theory? I don't know. Look up game theory. I'm sorry. Okay, so I think that's all the serious questions. Until next time, I'm sorry I have to cut this very short and spoken very quickly, but as I say, things to do now. Until next time, bye-bye.